Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
And my name is Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
Today we will be discussing a very tragic but strange disappearance of the Sodder children. The Sodders were a middle-class family of 12. One of the Sodders was in the army at the time of this incident occurred, so that family in no way is a part of the incident. The Sodders are from Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jeannie Sodder are the parents.
And a little background information about the Sodder family. So the father was born as Giorgio Sadu in Tula, Sardinia in 1895. When he was just 13 years old, he immigrated to Ellis Island in 1908. Whenever he was immigrating to the United States, his older brother went with him. And then after he moved to the United States, his brother returned back to Italy. And basically, George worked on the Pennsylvania railroads. A few months later, after working those railroads, he moved to West Virginia. He was a truck driver, and he was so inspired from working as a truck driver that he decided to create his own truck company after a couple years. And basically his truck company was for hauling dirt for construction. They also did freight and coal. West Virginia is super big on coal mining at this time.
How he met his wife, Jeannie Sodder, he walked into a music box store, and Jeannie Priani's was the owner's daughter, of course. She was also from Italy, and she immigrated to the United States when she was only 3 years old. So her and George got married. They had 10 children between 1923 and 1943 and settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Which, for those who don't know, Fayetteville is a small town with Italian immigrants. It's a huge Italian immigrant community. And the Sodders were referred to as one of the most respected middle-class families around there.
So into the incident of what happened. So it's Christmas Eve in 1945, and basically the family went to sleep. George and Jeannie Sodder and the 9 out of the 10 children that were there went to bed. And obviously they were excited for the next morning because if they went to sleep, they were going to be able to open presents from Santa. However, at 1 a.m. a fire broke out, which is absolutely scary to be sleeping and then all of a sudden your house is up in flames. George and Jeannie and 4 out of the 9 children that were there at the time escaped. George decided to go back to save his other babies. Those were his kids. So he busted a window open. He was how all fathers should be like. He would do anything to save his children.
But George couldn't see anything through the smoke, and he cut his skin from opening the window. The downstairs living room, kitchen, office, and bedroom were up in flames, but 2-year-old Sylvia was safe outside, along with 17-year-old Marion, 23-year-old John, and 16-year-old George Jr. George Jr. his hair was completely fried from the fire, and Sylvia's crib was obviously up in flames. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty were the ones that were left in the house, and they were stuck upstairs because between the 5 of them, they actually shared 2 bedrooms. So George thought he could just go back in there and he would save them, but unfortunately the stairway was engulfed in flames, so the 5 children were stuck between the 2 bedrooms.
So obviously, like we said, since the stairway was engulfed in flames, George needed to find another way to save his kids. So he did like what any normal person would do. He went outside, was going to go grab a ladder so that he could put the ladder and climb up it and put it like where the outside window was to rescue them. However, whenever he went to do this, the ladder was gone. Like, how convenient. He had another idea. That he was going to take his 2 coal trucks that he had in an attempt to put them together to basically get them. However, when he went to start the trucks, neither of them would start. which is also very weird. So while this fire is going on, the next best thing he thought is he needed to put the fire out as soon as possible because his kids are in there burning alive. So he went to grab water from the barrel, and the water was frozen solid. Now this was in the middle of winter, and it definitely, like, at that time can get really, like, they can get a lot of snow in West Virginia. During this period of time too, after he, like, busted the window earlier, he did not notice that, like, he had a bunch of blood all over his arm. He was too worried about saving his kids, which I don't blame him. He screamed their names multiple times to try to get their attention. Obviously did not get any response. And this is a result of any parent's worst nightmare.
Yeah, it is definitely something that's like straight up out of a crazy movie.
I don't have kids yet, but I definitely would honestly do the same thing too.
So the daughter Marion actually ran to the neighbor's house so she could call the Fayetteville Fire Department. The neighbors who also saw the house on fire called as well, but nobody picked up the phone. So the neighbor drove into town and got in contact with Fire Chief F.J. Morris. So Chief Morris from there alerted another firefighter. The fire department, which was only 2.5 miles away, didn't arrive until 8 o'clock in the morning. Keeping in mind that this fire had been going since 1 o'clock, which meant the fire was going for 7 hours straight. And once the fire department actually turned up, the house was basically in ashes. Why do you think it took the fire department 7 hours to arrive at the Sodder residence when the station was only 2.5 miles away?
So I think one reason why it could have taken them so long to respond is, like, firefighters, like, they do all sorts of calls, like, even, like, regular EMS calls, so they could have been on another call at the time, and unfortunately their house was on fire at this point. But since they were responding to, like, another call, who's to say, like, it wasn't another call for another fire, so obviously they would want to put that other fire out. It can take a lot of time to actually put, like, a fire out, depending how big it is. They also have to, like, put on their gear and everything and, like, clean up. So they could have totally been on, like, a different call. But yeah, it definitely is very unfortunate that it did take that long for them to respond. Anyway, so the parents, obviously, after the house was gone in ashes, they assumed that all 5 of the kids were dead. So on Christmas Day, the parents and the other people that were there decided to search for the children's remains. However, there was no luck at all. They didn't find, like, any remains from any of the children. Chief Morris believes the smoke could have been hot enough to burn their bodies. So if the smoke was hot enough, it would have had to be in at least 1400 degrees or higher to cremate their bodies, which would have been absolutely horrible. And then the state police inspector who was on the scene, he determined that the cause was likely from faulty wiring. So George, the father, covered the basement with dirt and decided to turn this into a burial for the kids, even though their bodies are obviously gone. And then the coroner's office issued death certificates for all 5 children, and they issued them around the new year because of all the holidays going on. So, do you think that the faulty wiring was the cause of this fire?
I mean, it's very possible that faulty wiring was the cause of this because it does lead to a lot of fires. But also, it could be something else that caused it, like somebody intentionally setting fire to their house, or maybe some other unknown reason.
That's true, and we'll get more into detail about that later. And then, do you yourself think that the fire was hot enough to cremate their bodies, yet leave no remains, including bones?
If the fire was truly between 1400 to 1600 degrees, it would be hot enough to cremate bodies, but bones don't chemically break down like flesh and other things do. So bones actually don't break down due to extremely hot temperatures. So there would have had to have been some bones left behind. So personally, I don't think it was hot enough to cremate the bodies and yet leave no remains behind. It just doesn't make any sense, like, chemistry wise.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because I've known, like, people who have cremated animals or humans, and there's always, like, scales or bones that are left over. This fire, till it turned into ashes, it was burning for 45 minutes, and then the house was gone. That's a lot shorter of a period of time compared to how long people are normally cremated.
But before this incident occurred, the Sodders actually planted flowers where the house stood, and a stranger came a few months later to the house. He did point to 2 separate fuse boxes and said this is going to cause a fire someday. George, who thought that was weird previously, had said the power company had looked over everything and said that it was safe. And so then another man tried to sell them family fire insurance. Of course, George declined, and the man had said to him, "Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini," which, for those at the time, if you don't know, Mussolini was the, overseer of, Italy, pretty much. And George did make a lot of comments about him just because he did not personally like Mussolini. So, do you think that the man that tried to sell the family fire insurance could somehow be involved with what happened to the Sodder family?
I definitely think he could be, because it is very odd that, beforehand, he said, that his house was gonna go up in smoke and his children were going to be, gone, and that's exactly what happened to him. So it definitely is a little bit suspicious, but at the same time, he could unintentionally mean, no harm, because it is very important. If you talk to any, home insurance company, they highly recommend you to have fire insurance and stuff like that to be insured, because it does happen. So of course, like we said, George basically whatever what she said, George basically brushed off his remarks and thought nothing of it. He thought that this man just wanted his money, because of course, when it comes to people with insurance, sales rep especially, a lot of people tend to think, oh, they just want my money, and they're not really wanting what's best for me. And then the older Sodder sons noticed a man a few days prior that was parked on Highway 21. And apparently this person was watching the little kids closely, and it was just super creepy. 12:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, a phone rang. Jenny, the mom, she answered it, and on the other line, it was an unknown female voice. And so Jenny obviously said that you had the wrong number and hung up the phone. After she hung up the phone, she went downstairs and saw the lights were all left on, and her front door was unlocked as well. So she went back to her room after turning off the lights and locking the door. And when she pretty much returned to her room, she said that she heard a loud bang on the roof and that it had a roaring type noise. And then not too long after that, the fire broke out. So why do you think that a strange female voice called Jenny the mother? Do you think that this call could have something to do with the fire?
I mean, it's possible it could have something to do with the fire, and also it could be some coincidental timing, and it surely could have been somebody who called a wrong number. We don't know, obviously, exactly what the call was for. But
yeah, it doesn't give too, really any details about the call. And then, why do you think the downstairs lights were on and the front door was left unlocked?
There's a couple things that come to my mind when I think of that. It could be that maybe one of the kids left the lights on and the front door unlocked. Maybe it was George himself who did it. Or it could have been somebody who managed to sneak inside before the fire was set and was kind of just trying to be nosy and find a bunch of different points to where they could set the house on fire. And so they just forgot to turn off the light and forgot to lock the door back just to make it not seem as suspicious.
Right, yeah. And some
But he
people,
fell.
I will say some people at times will forget to lock the door. Like, generally I'm pretty good, but there have been times where we completely have forgotten.
But Jeannie herself was completely shocked and confused as far as how her 5 children could go up in flames and have no remains left. So she actually did her own experiments, and she burned animal bones. But each time she was left with bone remains, which did not make sense. So she actually talked to an employee at a crematorium who, of course, was very experienced in this kind of stuff. And the employee explained that even after burning bodies at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, they were still left with human bones. The house actually only burned for 45 minutes until it turned to ash. And the telephone repairman actually investigated the wires and saw that the wires had been cut and not burned. And if they were cut, the power would have been cut, which would happen if the fire was electrical, of course. Was this fire intentionally set?
I think it is very possible that the fire was intentionally set because, like, we know, like, the door was, like, left unlocked, so that would leave an opportunity for someone to come in and figure out where to start the fire. Also, like we said, like, the actual, like, lights still stayed on, and usually whenever there is an electrical fire, the lights will also go out as well, and that did not happen. Also, the fact that Jenny said she heard some sort of strange noise is a little bit suspicious. And the fact, like, the wire was cut, it was not, like, burned, so obviously that seems like someone intentionally did that. Like, if it was a truly accidental electrical fire, I feel like it would have been burned and not, like, cut.
What truly happened to the children's bodies? Per Jenny's experiments and the employee, bones were still left even at 2,000 degrees.
So there's a couple things that could have happened to the bodies. The children could have actually truly burnt in the fire. However, someone could have taken their bodies away during the fire when the dad was trying to figure out how to save these kids. He obviously couldn't go upstairs because the fire was, like, on the stairs, so it was not safe. And, like, the ladder was gone too, so it does seem like a person could have used that ladder to get the kids from their rooms. But also the kids could still be alive and have been kidnapped and they could have still done the same thing where they took the ladder to take the kids away, to get the kids, and then they took the ladder with them. Then the father could not get up there and he was helpless. So there was several witnesses that did come forward with some different statements. The first witness said that she saw a man taking away car engines about a block away. So it is possible that this person could have taken the car engines from Sodder's coal truck, because if they took the engines, that's why those coal trucks wouldn't start. Sylvia, also the young little girl, after, like, the fire, she herself found a hard rubber object in the yard. Jenny does recall several times hearing a noise on the roof, and so it's indicating that it could possibly be that a pineapple bomb was thrown at the roof, because George basically, what he said is, like, they could have used a pineapple bomb or grenade, like, in warfare. And so my questions to you is, do you think someone took the engine from Sodder's coal trucks and that's why his trucks couldn't start? And why would they take the engine?
It's a lot to take an engine in a short amount of time. I think more so, instead of them taking the engines, I feel like they could have tampered with them, maybe by cutting wire or by somewhat disassembling the truck. But I feel like somebody definitely intentionally did something to these trucks.
And then, do you think that a pineapple grenade could have been thrown in distraction of the fire starting?
Yeah, no, it definitely could have been thrown. It could have, the fire and all that stuff. It could have done a lot of things. People are crazy, and pineapple bombs are very dangerous. But a witness did apparently see children in a car passing by during the fire. And a woman working at a tourist restaurant between Fayetteville and Charleston, West Virginia, saw the children and even claimed that she served them breakfast. There was a car with Florida license plates at the tourist court as well. But the woman at the Charleston hotel says she also saw 4 out of 5 of the missing kids and said that these kids were with 2 men and 2 women with Italian ancestry, and that the men appeared hostile, so she could not approach the kids, and they left early next morning. Could this actually be the missing Sodder children? And if this is the case, was this a kidnapping or an attempt to bring these children into some sort of pedophile ring?
So it could have been the children. It's really hard to say because we weren't there. So I said, like, photographs back then were not like, it's not like nowadays where you have so much like digital media available. You know, it's really hard to say if those were exactly the children, but they could have totally been the children. And if that was the children, yes, it was probably a kidnapping. It could have also, you said, been for sex trafficking as well, because there are people that are into it, as fucked up as it is to say. So the family decided to go ahead and hire a private investigator, and their name was C.C. Tinsley. And C.C. Tinsley discovered that the insurance salesman that tried to get George to buy the fire insurance for his house was a member of the coroner's jury. Apparently, the salesman claimed that the fire was accidental, and apparently Chief F.J. Morris found a heart in the fire but did not tell the family. And it apparently was buried at the scene. So Tinsley went to convince Morris to show him this human heart, and whenever they went to find the heart was not a human heart, it was beef liver. Basically, people theorize that he buried the beef liver so that the family would stop the investigation and stop asking questions. Do you believe that this fire was accidental?
This fire could have been completely accidental, whether it was started by an electrical problem or somebody accidentally lit the fire themselves. I feel like it's a possibility, but it's not like the most theory that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. And then why would Chief Morris bury a beef liver, damn well knowing it's not a real human heart remain?
Maybe he just wanted the family to have some sort of closure or tie to this beef liver, thinking that maybe it was a real human heart from one of their kids. Or he could have just been kind of fucked up.
I think that's like really messed up. Even if your intentions are trying to give the family hope, I think that's just fucked up.
But there are a couple more theories, of course. From this case, still no remains have been found. Bodies were completely burned. The family did not believe that it was faulty wiring because the lights were still on, and no one smelled burning flesh on top of that. The local crematorium said that remains would have been found if they truly had been burned. So this is where the kidnapping theory kind of comes in, especially because previously George had argued with the salesman over the Italian leader Benito Mussolini. And he even said that his children were going to be destroyed. But of course, they didn't have any concrete evidence against him. They just, kind of had the word of George, and they couldn't find anything on this guy, unfortunately.
And then there's another kind of like a little bit out there theory. It's that the 5 children were sold to an orphanage, which I find is a little bit weird because like the father seemed like he really truly did love his kids. However, the family did receive a letter from a woman in Italy saying that one of her kids were alive. Many people also reported sightings of seeing the kids. And then Jenny Sodder also received a photo from someone from Kentucky, a photo of what appeared to be one of her missing sons. She received that in the mail. And on the back of it, this is what it said. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, A90132 or 35. So obviously the family had a private investigator sent there, but the people who sent the photo, the family that sent the photo to them, was never heard of again. If the kids were kidnapped, many people believe that they were most likely kidnapped before the fire. So, do you think that the children could have been sent off to an orphanage? And if so, why?
I feel like these children could have been sold off to an orphanage for profiting for whoever did it, or because maybe this person actually worked for an orphanage and they were like, oh hey, we need children, let's go steal these kids. Fuck it, why not? So they saw this as like a perfect opportunity to set fire to a house and steal some kids, which is kind of fucked up if you really think about
Yeah,
it.
that is pretty fucked up.
It's like the worst thing you could ever do as a human being, besides killing somebody, of course.
Right, but I mean, there's so many crazy people, and like back then, we did not have like the level of like technology that we have today to prosecute people.
Yeah, no.
People got away with so much shit back then. It's insane.
Yeah, times were definitely different back then. But in the comments below, we would like to hear about what you think. Do you think the 5 Sodder children are still alive? Well, they may not be alive still. But if so, where could they be? Or did all the children actually sadly get engulfed in the fire? In conclusion, the tragic yet odd disappearance of the Sodder children remains a great mystery. So, once again, thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because you never know when a fire is going to break out, and join us back next week for another episode.